Here we are celebrating release day. So excited that I'm here with you. I wish that we were in person, but it's just an honor to be here with you. And I remember the first time that we met, I was very intimidated because I've never had like a strong relationship with bakery and pastry people that I've worked with. And we can talk more about that later. But you were so generous, and I can't even remember how exactly we met. I feel like it was like a blind date, and or maybe I was stalking you. But
I think you came to the mill.
I can't. Well, I think we had coffee. I think you were like keeping me away.
Right,
Like, we'll take coffee. But you know, I had always I had not connected so many things in terms of like what a baker is and what a baker does and what a baker can be, right? I don't understand the world. And I think maybe part of my relationship problems with bakers in the past had been that I had a lot of opinions, but I had no expertise. And that's beside the point. But you kind of like in that one conversation for 2 hours, we sat and had coffee and you explained this world to me. And now seeing your beautiful book, I feel like you're explaining it to everyone that reads your book. So it's just an honor to be here with you. So thanks. I think you might want to do a little, like, let's get some flavor of the book. You feel like doing that?
Yeah, sure. No, thank you. Thank you. It's such a treat to get to do this with you. And I'm sorry that we're not doing it in person because you are so fun. You are. I felt like when I met you, the two of us could really do some damage in the world. Good damage. Good damage. You know, change the conversation. Yeah. So, but yeah. So of course, I want to like dive into a small reading that takes people right into maybe not the culinary aspect as much as the sort of the surrounding environment and the world of, you know, the container that Carolina Ground was sort of well, how do I say, sort of what is the foundation of all of this? And yeah, so I'm just going to dive in and stop trying to explain it. But this is me early on when I was a baker. So I'm just going to read for 5 minutes or so. And so this is the beginning of the chapter called The Seed. And so, you know, this book is about a third narrative, and then it has lovely recipes. And part of the narrative is profiles of bakers. So, you know, I was really trying to create something that one could enter from a lot of different places. But okay, so in early summer of 2008, a package arrived at my bakery containing samples of wheat. The package was from the United States Department of Agriculture, Agricultural Research Service, and the wheat was from Dr. David Marshall's Uniform Bread Wheat Trials. I was curious and also amazed. My little bakery tucked away in the mountains of Western North Carolina seemed an unlikely candidate to provide any feedback of value to this federal agency. I had assumed their work catered solely to agribusiness and industrial food production, with wheat breeding focused on industrial bakery application. And yet the origins of the USDA ARS is rooted in the idea of providing for agriculturally based trades, establishing a link between scientists and those producing our food, farmers, ranchers, and processors, bakers. The agency was founded as part of the Hatch Act in 1887, when the agricultural landscape looked very different from how it looks today. In today's world of mega agribusiness and industrial food production, I had not considered the possibility that a small artisan bakery could have a voice. But when I reached out to Myron Fountain of the USDA to thank him for sending the grain and share our positive results with him, his response was immediate and engaging. He expressed a willingness to collaborate in bringing these wheat varieties to the attention of the baking community. God, the sunlight is interesting. A few weeks later, the first bread wheat field day in the southeastern United States was hosted by the USDA ARS and North Carolina State University in Waynesville, North Carolina. It was titled Bread, Wheat, and Organic Production. Bakers from throughout Western North Carolina showed up. We were curious. We had all received invitations. The flour we used to make our bread was ground from grain grown at least 1,000 miles away in the Great Plains states or Canada. Trial plots of wheat forming a patchwork of varying shades of amber provided a backdrop for Dr. Marshall's the USDA-ARS lead researcher and his wheat breeder. He introduced himself and his uniform bread wheat trials, providing a brief history of the breeding program, which began in 2002 to identify and breed wheat having hard wheat quality, aka bread wheat, for production in the humid environments of the eastern United States. Bread wheat is traditionally grown west of the Mississippi. East of the Mississippi, North Carolina grows more soft wheat used in pastry, flour, and or feed than any other southern state. Dr. Marshall explained that for his identification phase of the program, he collected varieties and advanced breeding lines from breeders in Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, Colorado, principally the Great Plains states, and planted them in Georgia, North Carolina, Kentucky, Virginia, Maryland, and Pennsylvania. His rows of wheat contained both old and modern varieties, soft and hard. Old varieties such as Federation and Red Fife grew next to newer varieties such as Dual, Hondo, ARS 033806 and ARS 5051234. Because there is only a single crop of winter wheat per year, he established a partnership with a program in New Zealand so he could get 2 generations of wheat per year. And since 2002, more than 1,000 crosses had been made annually, breeding for disease resistance, yield, and baking quality. Even still, it would take 7 to 10 years for a variety to be deemed acceptable for public release. Dr. Marshall employs classical breeding practices with no modification of genes between species. All genes he works with are within the wheat family, and all of his breeds can be tracked back to the Fertile Crescent where wheat originated. Dr. Marshall is a public breeder, and his uniform bread wheat trials is a public breeding program. In 2008, I barely understood the significance of this, although the willingness of Myron Fountain, Marshall's assistant, to engage with my bakery was a tangible clue. I had worked with this agricultural product, wheat, milling my grain, grown by organic farmers who had clearly benefited from plant breeding for over a decade before meeting Myron or Dr. Marshall, and still I was challenged by the idea of science and food being so closely aligned. But as I fully immersed myself into the agricultural side of baking, I came to appreciate the vision and conviction of our forefathers who established public institutions that would bridge the science community and those growing our food. Preceding the 1887 Hatch Act, the Morrill Act of 1862, also known as the Land Grant College Act, signed by President Lincoln, established a system of higher education in this country, quote, for the common good of the industrial classes. It democratized higher learning and established state agricultural colleges that enabled both research and access to pragmatic application for the benefit of society for the common good. The Smith-Lever Act of 1914 built upon both the Morrill Act and the Hatch Act by establishing the Cooperative Extension Service, which provided liaisons between the land-grant universities and farmers, North Carolina State University and the USDA-ARS and the Cooperative Extension. All of these entities working in concert were fundamental to the success of Carolina Ground. Having access to seed varieties bred for resistance to disease, specifically for our region, regionally adapted varieties that produce acceptable yields, had been essential to building lasting relationships with our organic growers. And for growers to be introduced to these varieties through field days put on by these agencies addressing production, harvest, post-harvest handling had been foundational to our ability to rebuild a sustainable grain-based food system. And yet, this is not to say that heritage varieties that predate modern breeding practices of the mid-20th century, do not have a place at the table, because they do. And we need the diversity both on farm and on our pallets. But having a foundation of seed varieties that the farmer feels comfortable planting and that produce yields, enabling a price point where bakeries can afford to make real commitments to mills like ours, has been an essential piece of the equation. A few months after that field day, I traveled down to Columbia, South Carolina to meet Glenn Roberts, whom I'd met for the first time at that field day. A decade earlier, Glenn had launched Anson Mills with the sole purpose of bringing back the ingredients that defined the antebellum Southern larder: Carolina Gold rice, red May wheat, Sea Island red peas, Sea Island Bene seeds, and numerous varieties of Southern colonial mill corn. I'd assumed that because his focus was reviving ingredients from the past, he would have little interest in Dr. Marshall's work, but Glenn noted how lucky we are to have Dr. Marshall in North Carolina. He described Dr. Marshall to me as a dying breed, a concept propagated by the 2008-2003 Nature magazine article by Jonathan Knight entitled A Dying Breed, which explores the loss of public sector research into classical breeding. Just as I had begun to fully realize the significance and value of this public sector work, that Dr. Marshall is a public servant and his breeding program is for the public good, I had also had to accept the reality that he is, as Glenn described, part of a dying breed. Over the past 20 years, the decline in public funding for sector plant breeding programs and the decline in the number of public breeders has been profound. According to the USDA, between 2008 and 2013, the real inflation-adjusted public food and agriculture R&D fell by 20%, while real private R&D increased by 64%. But wheat, unlike corn or soybeans or canola or cotton, is one of the few remaining field crops that is still largely in the public hands because commercial seed producers have a more difficult time realizing a robust return on investment for wheat. Wheat is self-pollinating, reproducing itself to near purity, so growers can save seed to replant without losing too much of the desired characteristics of the variety, thus hindering commercial interest. Wheat is not only the only one of the few remaining vestiges of a system that was put in place for the benefit of society as a whole, but projects like Dr. Marshall's uniform bread wheat trials underscore the greater return on investment that public sector agriculture programs have on a community. The social return on investment is not going to equate to immediate and direct profit from, for example, the sale of seed, but is realized with each bakery that chooses to forego their imported commodity flour and instead engages with growers in their region through their use of regionally grown and ground flour. It is through breads and pastries made with that flour that bakeries are making an economic and social impact on their communities. And it is through flavor and story that they engage their customers in reclaiming this fundamental piece of a sustainable food system. Thank you. This is the irony of having a launch. You've never read, it's like.
You got to read it sometime.
I know.
But you
Anyway.
edited your book during a pandemic and during an unprecedented global pandemic. So that must have been a crazy situation.
Well, what it did for me in a huge way, because the beginning of the pandemic, we had a huge wave of interest in our flour from people who I don't think had ever baked anything in their entire lives. It was a whole different, our retail sector, which is an online sales, is usually the avid home baker. It's not, it's for the longest time.
Novels.
Yeah. And the pandemic brought literally 100% increase in our production. So we're scrambling to fill these orders. And I'm also working on edits and realizing, oh my gosh, people are asking really basic questions. I need to make this book accessible to anybody. And so, hopefully it is. I worked really hard to try and sort of think about my daughter reading it or, other people that I know that are interested, but even though my daughter grew up with it, she's
well, that means she knows less about it than anyone probably, right?
That's
the thing. Well, so my mom always used to call like white bread that we always craved and always wanted when we were getting Roman meal, like empty calories, right?
Oh yeah.
And I think like we have to warn people. I'm sure a lot of folks that are on the call are already used to kind of eating this way. But you can't really go back because I think once you taste your favorite things, like whether it's just like sourdough bread or sandwich bread or even a shortbread cookie or even a croissant or something, that's laminated, it's like you don't ever want to have the old version of it again. People get used to that, right? But at the same time, it's really hard to achieve, or at least in my perception, it's hard to achieve using whole grains in that same kind of like decadent, delicious, fluffy, whatever, just super, super addictive way. So did you have to establish an 800 number for home bakers who were calling you?
Right. Well, I think that unlike local tomato, where you're going to easily taste the difference. Like, okay, a local tomato is going to just be a different item than, what you're getting from the grocery store. With grain, it could be grown in North Carolina and processed in a roller mill, or grown in California and processed in the roller mill, and you wouldn't taste the difference.
So can you
So,
explain to everyone what roller mill is versus?
yeah,
Yeah.
buy the book and you'll find. No, I'm kidding.
Find out.
Yeah. So most flour, and the lighting, I hope is just not too weird. It's like the sun just
It's
started
romantic.
coming down right when, yeah. Anyways, who'd have thunk? This whole virtual world. So roller mill is an incredibly efficient way of processing grain to flour. It is the dominant way of processing grain to flour, and its efficiency has made it the dominant way. But what they do is they take the grain berry and they strip away the germ, and they strip away the bran, and you're left with just the starchy endosperm. So you get that sort of functional. I mean, they realized after the fact, oh, there's like no nutrients in this. We've taken away all the nutrients and only got the function. It's not gonna like go bad on the shelf. There's no oils in it, nothing, to give it any character or flavor, but it will perform really well. So now we have to enrich it, because you can't just sell this, it has to have some sort of value beyond function. So that's what I mean, if you think about sugar, white sugar, I sort of, when your mom is talking about empty calories, it's just like super high glycemic,
Yeah.
you're going to just, stone ground intact is what we do. So you're, instead of separate, they're separating out their bran for the germ from the endosperm. I mean, even the whole wheat, they'll recombine, but oftentimes remove that oily germ, which is the vitality and the oils and and a lot of the flavor. So with stone ground, we grind intact, where it's just, just the wheat berry between stones. I mean, this is like, we've been doing this for a long time. When I was in college, I worked for an archaeologist as like a job, as just like a lab, summer job, going through like, they would come back with digs, and we would have to like wash it and sort it out. And my favorite thing to find was that mortar and pestle. It's just like the stone that, it's just, this is our, yeah. So same technology, stone on stone.
Yeah.
At Carolina Ground and a lot of mills these days, the regional mills, I mean, we cold stone mills, so we're keeping our temperatures below 100 degrees, hopefully below 90. We're really about protecting those aspects that bring this sort of quality and flavor to the flour. And we can either do whole grain or sift out some of that, but you're still going to have the germ, you're still going to have some of the bran. But the reason that the choice of stone ground, I mean, to me, is, again, like, you could be milling, roller milling a grain that was grown in North Carolina, and you wouldn't be able to taste the difference. So when somebody comes to us and they want to, they need flour, I want to inspire them with flavor and texture and tooth, and, to invite the idea that flour is an ingredient that can interact just as much as all of the other ingredients. So if we're, our recipes in the book are, both bread recipes and pastry. The rye section is like half of it's bread, half of it's pastry, or sweet and savory. And to be driven, to think about, like, what are the flavor components that marry well with, like, our most highly sifted product, or crema, which I think of, lemon and, citrus or cream, or that end. Whereas, like, if it's in the pastry, rolled whole wheat pastry, I'm thinking like some warming spices and cardamom. So it's really sort of taking it to, for us, it was reclaiming grains as an agricultural product, not as just a fungible commodity, and then in that, really engaging with the flavor piece, like wine or coffee or chocolate.
Well, when you have something that's a commodity product, and then you decide to do it in the most expensive way that's humanly currently available to you, which is what you did, you got an email from a miller in Kansas who told you early on, I don't know what year this was, but you've chosen to get involved in one of the most difficult projects in American agriculture.
And he's absolutely right.
So you had just taken the LSAT.
real. It's no.
Law school seems like it would have been more tangible, would have had a
No,
beginning
seriously.
and an end.
Well, yeah, it would have, because I would have I've watched a lot of YouTube videos to try, like literally trying to understand that, there was just also this sort of big divide between culturally between bakers and farmers. And I was a baker and I was stepping in as a miller. So I had reached out to this miller asking for some advice. And he was like, yeah, good. I mean, he was very kind, but partly like, good luck. This is a really challenging endeavor. And it is like, I cannot tell you how, I mean, especially when you come into a scenario where you don't have infrastructure set up.
Yeah.
North Carolina does grow more soft wheat than any other southern state. So we happen to have a public breeder. We happen to have, like growers growing, they were growing grain. We work with organic growers. I was asking them to sort of, change to a variety that was twice as expensive and had half the yield for a market that was going to be more difficult to do. Okay, we got to have this food grade. We got to, I mean, there was like a lot of pieces. And then there was just like the sort of the cultural piece of trust me. And even though you have no reason to,
Right.
but it's been, really a wonderful evolution and kind of handshake agreements with farmers. And I didn't, I didn't do a lot on the farmer in the book because I didn't want to take their time. I didn't want to ask them to come off the farm and interview. And every time I meet with them, I just want to understand a little bit more about what's going on that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think really you were out there in 1994. Right? Is that when you started Natural Bridge?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you were the only person who was doing like wood-fired, naturally leavened. I'm just going to marry you. Wood-fired,
I think that works
naturally
better.
leavened
Okay.
bread in the Southeast. I think maybe even a larger area. So what was that like, and why did it all start happening in Asheville?
Okay, I'm moving away from the sun. That totally worked. Okay, sorry about that. I'm so
I'd like to
challenged
get a new
by
room.
yeah. Well, it was a lot of bread tastings and explaining to people what this was. I mean, I was a whole grain naturally leavened baker, so I was in Tennessee and then in North Carolina, Asheville area, where I did start out at farmers market. We were back in the early 90s. We were definitely the freaks in the parking lot, like definitely, like you'd see like the mother and kid walk by and the mother's like, don't make eye contact with those people. And it'd be like, four farmers and me. Barry Rubenstein is probably not on this call, but he was one of those people that started the French Broad tailgate market and, back in the day. And, but, Asheville back then was very much kind of hippie whole wheat bread. And I was like, well, this is not that, just sort of, for me, I was really committed. It wasn't just natural leavening, but working with whole grains and sort of saving whole grains from where I felt, it was sort of mired in this like 1970s whole wheat bread is cardboard. And when I started baking, I mean, there were so few people doing natural leavening, and I felt sort of the same way as I did with this mill of like, we've got to reclaim this tradition. We can't let this be lost, and so I felt with the bread so impassioned to sort of bring this back and get people tasting it. I wanted to talk to them about like phytic acid or like, the nutritional value of this. And they're just like, shut up. I just want to taste this, cause yeah. So, but I mean, it was just sort of the beginning, and people, when people taste, I think that really, it's not just like tasting something. I found that with the fresh flour, you taste it and it's like, I think personally, it sort of wakes up a memory that we have, like, oh yeah, this is what it should taste like, because
Yeah.
I think that we carry that in our bodies. Like, this is what it should taste like. So
That's powerful. That's so powerful to think about, and thinking about your description of commodity flour and how we've taken everything out of it. and then we have to put stuff back into it. It's just like very much the Wendell Berry thing of just like we've taken a solution and divided it into two problems. I'm paraphrasing, but I mean, like by taking animals off the land and by extracting everything that is good and nourishing in wheat, we've created this like vast amount of empty calories that so many people rely on because it's so cheap.
Mhm.
So I have to ask you, how do you make money? Because I know that and when I say make money, I mean break even, because that's always what we're talking about. But your goal is to provide the best possible to get as much money back to the farms as you can, while keeping the flour prices as low as possible for the wholesale bakers so they can introduce people to all of these grains and flavors and new experiences, because they also have a burden on them, because a pastry, a cheese Danish in New York is probably 75 cents today, or $1.25. And, a cheese Danish, I don't know why I picked cheese Danish. I just had one from Strong Arm Baking yesterday with like lemon
Yay.
curd. That was so good.
Julie.
But like I haven't had a cheese Danish in 20 years, but like that you want everybody to feel the impact as little as possible. And so you take the impact for them, not a typical middle person,
Well,
especially in
yeah.
agriculture. So how do you do that?
I mean, part of it, we started out, I mean, it was definitely this idea came on the heels of the 2008 economic crisis, that like the price of wheat had gotten incredibly unstable and had shot up as much as 130%. So, it was kind of trying to hedge ourselves from the commodities market, create real pricing. Because when I was a baker, the price would go up, the price would go down. And now, talking with farmers, I mean, in the beginning, like farmers were like, wow, they did really well in 2008. Can we go in and say, hey, we really just want to not have that, because most of the time the price is low, so it wasn't like I want to give the best possible price. It was, I want to give a price that is fair and is solid and is better than what you're going to get from like, other markets.
Right.
Because the baker, and trying to find a place where the mill can exist, the baker can exist, the farmer can exist, and that we can plan our businesses not at the mercy of like commodity index fund or something like that,
Right.
and then, but at the same time, we, when I started the retail store, the online store, which initially I was like, no, we're just going to keep this local. And it was like, wait, no. we got to utilize technology in front of us, use the online store and sell some flour. And that what's really, to me, exciting about the online store is that those people that support us, and we have our regulars, we love it. Like we definitely have like people that have been with us for a long time. We see them, Lydia and I are like always, it's like, is that those people are really subsidizing the equation for us. We sell our retail flour at a premium, and it really helps the equation for the mill and the farm and the wholesale bakery, so that's sort
so
of
important. So people, when they're buying retail from you, it might be twice as much as what they're paying for regular flour, but it's like the difference between $2 and $5, and they're like contributing this enormous thing to this business that's changing agriculture in the South.
That's the hope,
Yeah.
that we're impacting, in a bigger way. I would say it impacts the bakers. It impacts the farmers for sure. Like every year we have bought more and more grain, but like an acre of land is a ton of flour. So really it's in the baker's hands to make that change. And I continue to cheer on the bakers and inspire them with that charge. Like y'all hold the reins. So like as much as you can like bring in the regional flour and push out that other commodity flour, it's really, they really can make the biggest impact. And because it would be amazing if there was space for regional mills at each little enclave. At this point it's like, I love waking people up through flavor, but when they visually see something, they have to taste it to get like, hey, it doesn't need to look a certain way. If you look at the pastries and the breads in France, especially the bread, in France or in Europe, in Germany, it doesn't look the same as American. I'm always the most intrigued by something that is less fluffy or less that's a little awkward. Like, that's got to be good. That's going to be
Yes.
interesting.
There's a reason that it's awkward. Well, kind of like taking a big turn into flavor. I want to know what like the Jennifer Lapidus diet is. Going back into my stalker portal, if I knew you, I'd be like, wonder what she eats for breakfast. Like,
Right.
what's
Okay.
your day like? Just
Yeah.
as I know there's lots of days that are different. Every day is different, but like, what is a day that you love? And what do you
Well,
eat? And what do you do in your day?
stalker. I'm kidding. I am a rye lover. I do, and I bake for us every other week. I'll make like a lot. Like lately, I've been doing. I kind of have been going between Brennan Walnut Schoolhouse's recipe for the scalded Russian rye.
I love that. I
It's
love
lovely,
that
and I'll
recipe.
do it in a
Show us the
14-inch
picture if
Pullman.
you can see
Yeah,
it.
the pinch. I know
Like,
the picture
yeah,
is gorgeous, and it's like I'll do it in the 14-inch Pullman, just
yeah.
and add-ins if I feel like it. But and then Gregorio has a beautiful recipe for it's a Vulcanbrot that I've been, so I've been kind of going between those two, and rye breads are so easy to do. These rye breads, once you have created the
Why are
culture.
rye breads easier?
Well, you don't have to develop, you don't have to do the full stretch and fold. You're not developing it
Because
has a
you're not
whole,
developing
the gluten, it's
the
a
gluten,
totally different type of gluten, and
right?
it's oh, don't ask me to say this out of my head. It's pentatosins.
No. You don't need to
Okay.
say that. But look, I'm going to talk for a second and look for that picture if you can find it, because
Yeah.
I think people would love to see that because it's just so gorgeous,
Okay.
and that'll make it more like a book party.
Yeah.
Looking at your book.
Yeah.
Well, so
But
yes, work, and I want to keep hearing about your day. So you get
okay.
up like
So
you
I'll
get up
do,
at like 3 in the morning.
no, I'm a miller now, not a baker. So I don't have to get up at that hour.
There's
But
a lot of competition between farmers and bakers and chefs about who works harder. And I've seen your workplace, and I've seen the kind of like environmental dangers of your workplace and the environmental dangers on a farm. Ooh, and I would say yours is the harder job.
that's the picture of the of that scalded rye. So beautiful because it
So
shows,
beautiful.
yeah. Um I am I do toast with with tahini, like a really nice roasted thin tahini, like Stephen Miller, and orange marmalade. That's
Mm,
yeah.
yum.
I'm a fan of bitter tastes, so
Mhm.
um
I know you drink coffee.
I do drink coffee. We've also been doing these like fun mushroom like coffees too. Like, but I do both.
Kids are calling
Um,
them shrooms now, Jen.
oh, okay.
I'm
Okay.
just
Not that. Yeah. And then these days, most of the time I'm going to the mill, and I'm
yeah,
often sitting in front of a computer.
yeah,
I mean, on Mondays, I'm in there palletizing orders and Mondays are our day to ship out, because with grain as opposed to with that tomato, we do tend to look at it in a region instead of
right.
local. So we're sending flour out to like
Yeah,
Florida, Virginia, South Carolina, Georgia, Louisiana, as represented in this book.
yeah.
So yes,
Yeah, I want to talk about the book more and
yeah.
also like about your collaborations if they come up as we're talking about the book. But I would love to see like some of your favorite recipes, or for you to just talk about some things that just come top of mind that surprised you when you were gathering recipes from your favorite bakers and
Wow. Yeah. Okay. So the first recipe that came to me, which was before the book idea, was Joe. I think that Joe pronounces his name Bowie, and I wish I had asked Joe that. It's spelt like David Bowie, but Joe is this amazing, lovely man and baker and professional dancer instructor. Anyways, he and it's like at Brooklyn Bread Nerd on Instagram, if ever anyone wants to follow.
mm,
Anyways, this chocolate rye brownie is so exciting to
mm,
me. I know I'm like sticking with the rye, but I'm
no,
show the picture. We just this is I like to top this one too with this like charcoal sea salt because it's so beautiful with like black on the brown. It's just gorgeous. And it's such an easy recipe. I came at this as a bread baker and thought like stone ground pastry, whatever. And I really got excited about the pastry at the end of the day. I really love sort of the flavor component on and the tooth that stone ground flour adds to pastry. These
I think it makes it
Portuguese,
more satisfying, right? Like it's not like you can eat like a Danish that's this big or a muffin that's this big that's white flour, and you can eat like a real flour item, whatever it is, a pastry, a muffin, anything, or scone, and it's like so much more satisfying.
yeah, and it's in such a like I think that there's just sort of like the multifaceted flavor. Like I have gone through and said, here, taste this with like when I've done sort of, I don't know, there was doing some bread symposium at Johnson and Wales, and I was like handing people out like shortbread cookies I'd made. Taste this, taste this. And it was one of them was with our flour, one of them was with roller milled flour. What do you taste the difference? And they
Right.
were like, oh my God, the roller mill tastes so much sweeter, even
Yeah.
though it was exactly the same ingredients.
Right.
You know, there was a complexity to the flavor of, you know, ours, which was like a high extraction. We just sifted out 15 parts. I love these Portuguese biscuits. They're super fun.
Oh, that's
This baker had sent me a package of stuff that he was doing at the time, and you know, crackers and these biscuits, and I was like obsessed with these, and I was like, we've got to try this. And it's a really easy recipe, really fun. I thought it looked so complicated, you know, just like it's lovely. So,
yeah.
and with tea, I like
With
tea too.
tea.
I like
So
tea.
at 4 o'clock, what does Jen do at
Oh,
4 o'clock after you have your tea and your biscuits?
at
You
four
keep
o'clock in the
working into the night?
morning.
No, in the
evening.
afternoon.
Oh, in the afternoon.
No, it's tea
Well,
time. It's like late tea
oh,
time.
like late
Yeah.
tea time. I mean, I love cycling and walking. I've lately been obsessed with natural wines in the same way as I am with, you know, just really intrigued by that movement and
Yeah,
these like lower alcohol, lower sugar, beautiful wines.
totally.
So I'm, you know, not opposed to a glass of wine. I cook.
Do you eat bread every day?
I do mostly rye. I do eat some wheat, but I definitely tend to be more of a rye eater.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And like, where do you stand? So I have friends who are bakers who are in all different spectrums in their opposition to the GF idea, to the gluten-free
Gluten-free. Oh yeah.
the ubiquity of people who are gluten-free. Now I am like kind of sensitive to gluten myself,
Yeah.
but I come
As
to
am I.
Asheville. Yeah. Oh, you are. Oh, so
Oh,
that's interesting.
totally.
Talk
I'm
about that.
so
Yeah.
overexposed to it, but I do think, you know, I mean, I've been in the industry for like 25 years.
Yeah.
So there's that. I find that I personally have always done better with rye, but I think that stone ground and naturally leavened make everything easier. I am super excited about things that are gluten-free when they're real, when they're like
Right.
something
Right.
that's made from rice flour or
Yeah.
buckwheat flour. I am not so excited about like tapioca starch, or I mean, not to say that it's not real, but it's an extraction. So,
Totally.
and
Yeah.
I really am intrigued by those other pieces, just because culinarily, I love, well, on that level, I love it for the different flavor and different texture, but also agronomically, well, I mean, the diversity, if we could build the market for the diversity
Totally.
on those rotations, that's super exciting to me. So, you know, I, I hate to call it like this is gluten free, but you know, just because why not just be an equal member of the foods that we eat? You know?
Totally. 100%. I went to the beach last summer with a family that was experimenting with gluten-free, and they had like every product under the sun that was a replacement for the exact cheese curl that their kids liked and the exact this and all of that.
Yeah.
And like that stuff is, I feel like it's not, you might as well just be eating whatever. Like
Yeah.
it's completely
It can get,
disconnected
yeah.
from culture, from community, from participation in this thing that we all need to do together of like joining hands and like making our food system different. It's just kind of like assigning, it's like a different name to the same thing.
Same ailment. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'd love for you to just like kind of, we're going to do Q&A in a second, but could you kind of close us out by talking about why, what happened when we lost mills? I mean,
Right.
briefly describe the history of the world and be specific.
Right.
What happened when we lost mills, and what could we regain as we start to gain them back?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is something to be said for like losing that community mill and that community, the bakers, those of us who were baking in 2008 really got a sort of major, kind of wake up when we, to how disconnected we were to our most essential ingredient. None of us, I mean, I baked for 14 and a half years, like with Natural Bridge Bakery, and I didn't know I think it was about that. I didn't know what wheat, like how wheat looked when it grew in the ground. I mean, I knew like waves of grain and all that, but not like what happened, what's a tiller, so, I mean, and then kind of on the farmer end, I mean, even, yeah, like just that we don't, it used to be that the miller would be receiving, it was a corn, they would receive corn, they would mill it, and they would keep part of it for themselves, as payment. And it was just such, so much more of a community aspect. I mean, and having those backup markets that create another level of community, whether it's, feed markets or distillery, or I mean, there's miso makers in Rutherfordton, I mean, what are the various markets that
You're talking about your collaborations have always been amazing to me. And like, you've introduced me to like Burial when we were doing that, like that like byproduct of what they were doing. Like the
Right. That was
collaborations
such a
can't
good thing.
happen if it's a commodity product.
Right. And like I talked about in the book, I think I kind of went into that, just sort of like the quality of having one crop one year that the farmer was like, I don't even want to send you a sample. It's not even good. And when I tried it, I was like, oh, there's really good protein in this. And he had a drought, and it really functioned well for us. But it wasn't just that it functioned well and we were able to kind of clean it up and give him a better market than he would have if he'd gone to feed market, but it had such a unique flavor because of its conditions. And that's something you would never get, and I mean, there's definitely like a lot of foolhardy moments for me of like, I'm going to use this grain, even though it's partially sprouted. I think we can do this, and it's like, okay, there's a reason why certain, so it's, but if you're really small, I mean, I'm selling to bakers, but if you've got like the baker, farmer, miller all under one roof, why not? I mean, and I think with this movement, we need all of it. We need those people that are like super focused on heritage. That, I mean, with us, you talk about gluten-free, we are, we definitely are led by our modern wheats on our end, which is not like the old heritage stuff. And it's, I personally feel like we need all of it, because I certainly, it would be challenging for me to go to the farmers here and say, hey, would you go this Friday? I know the other one was half the yield and twice as much. This is kind of a fraction of the yield and a lot more expensive, but still try it. And I don't know how it's going to go. I definitely feel that we need to be growing heritage grains, but of my community of farmers, that was a hard sell, and it's a long story and it's a big story. And so, when we talk about gluten-free stuff, I think part of it is inflammation. And I'm really curious about all of that, like how to.
Yeah. And just like one quick follow up on that, I think like the whole heirloom idea and conversation can be very tricky,
Yeah.
right? Because there's this like kind of romantic idea and a sentimental idea, and like in best case scenario, heirlooms or non-hybridized seeds are things that existed for a reason, because like there was drought, or there were, salt in the land, or because it was like by the coast, or a million different reasons. And like those things are things we need to hang on to. Those traits are things we need to hang on to. Or apples in the South, like Lee Calhoun's work. So many different things. It's like heirlooms are about the future, but we're all about traditional breeding. And when I say we all, I mean just like the people who think about heirlooms in the way that I think are helpful. We're thinking about heirlooms for the future, and we're thinking about traits for the future. We're not necessarily, of course, protect the mortgage lifter tomato, or name a wheat that is not particularly high yielding. that we should protect it, but that's not going to be feasible to grow in the future.
Right.
On a
Right.
large
I mean,
scale.
right. I mean, and there's amazing things going on nationwide with the regional grains movement. So, I'm super excited to kind of just watch that stuff while our Southern conversation is kind of slow, but
Right.
we're continuing to move forward and yeah.
Just give us 30 seconds on like public breeding versus like where that has collapsed and why we don't have, there hasn't been the investment in public breeding that there was prior to 1950 and how that's left the industry.
Yeah. I mean, I speak about it in that reading, but it's been gutted. I mean, like I said, I really didn't understand when I first got into this how lucky we were. And Glenn Roberts, who is super committed to heritage, was the one to say, hey, you're really lucky. This guy is a dying breed, and Dr. Marshall is like amazing. I mean, walking through, it's so interesting because he did his 30 seconds here. He did his like postgraduate work under Borlaug, under Norman Borlaug, who was like, I used to think was like, oh, he's the beginning of the Green Revolution. That's horrible. But he also got the Nobel Peace Prize. Wonder why, and it's like, wait, this guy spent all of his time working in third world countries and really was a scientist who just wanted to feed the world. I mean, what people did with his, and whatever, dwarf wheats or whatever, it wasn't the ethos behind what he was trying to do. And I see with Dr. Marshall, who quickly, like when he started working with us, I mean, he really has like shifted to like wanting to understand flavor profile, wanting to like see this on organic, and I see him like walk through his fields at Lake Wheeler outside of Raleigh, where he literally will put his hand on the wheats as he walks and touch them like it's his children, his prodigy. And like he handpicks the selection. He says, if we ever aren't able to do this by hand, I'm quitting, like that is so important to him, so I don't know. I think it's really unique. And if we didn't have a public breeding program, I mean, a private breeder, they'll come in, they'll do a few varieties in the South for a few years and say, oh yeah, it'll grow here. And then they go back to their big states. And that's not, I mean, public breeding, it's like hundreds of crosses. It's about research. It's about, it's not driven by profit. And yeah, so now that was about 60 seconds. No, that was more like 120 seconds. Sorry.
120 seconds is perfect.
Do we have
Stephanie,
questions?
I think, Stephanie, you're looking at the chat.
We do have a couple of questions. Thank you. And this has been a great conversation and fascinating. And of course, we encourage people to pick up the book, but I feel like we've already learned quite a bit just in this time. So thank you both so much. And it's also been fun. So, especially the part about shrooms.
Don't call them shrooms. They call them boomers. I'm sorry. I said shrooms. No, they call them boomers. Yeah.
Boomers down. Okay. So a couple of questions. Alan has a question. Aside from your own flowers, Jennifer, which other regional millers do you recommend or admire? And
Right.
maybe somebody else served as a little bit of a template for you.
Oh, I mean, I'm a huge fan of Farmer Ground Mill in New York. Yeah, that's Greg Mall and Tor Oshner and Neil, whose last name I don't know, but Carolina Ground is sort of inspired. The name was inspired by Farmer Ground, who they were all, was originally Eric, not, anyways, there were 3 different generations, all had gone to Cornell, and all, farmer miller, 2 farmers and a guy who does the milling. And they just sort of saw the writing on the wall. This was pre Carolina Ground, clearly, and so generous with their time, and just, and that whole thing had been started with, a lot of really interesting things going on up north with June Russell at the Greens Market, who they had created I think it was it was either 10 or 20% or somewhere in there, where the people at Farmers Market had to have New York grown grain. And the Greens Market is like the largest farmers market in the country. It's a number of boroughs. And so June Russell, who was the farm inspector, kind of ended up in this position of trying to, the bakers had this prerogative, but they didn't have flour. So, kind of helping push this forward amongst folks to, create products so that create flour so that bakers could have flour to get into their market. So farmer ground, huge. I mean, I'm part of a network of, there's like Somerset, or they go by Main Grains now, up in Skowhegan. There's Grist and Toll if you're on the West Coast, and Janie's Mill in Chicago. They're wonderful people. I just met the folks from Meadows Lark Mill in they're out west as well. I'm forgetting. Right here in Asheville, we have Farm and Sparrow. We're super lucky. Dave and I are dear friends, and we're really lucky to have kind of the collaboration. I mean, like, he does more heritage stuff. We're doing, we I think see each other as kind of collaborators. And who else? I mean, of course, there's Anson Mills down in Columbia, South Carolina. Barton Springs Mill in Austin. I mean, there's like a lot of really good operations, and I do include that in the back of my book. Is a resources section, broken out geography, because the hope is with this book that you can, use the mill that's closest to you, or buy Carolina ground. But
I also try different recipes with different flours from different mills across the country.
Absolutely,
and
don't be afraid.
Everyone's retail operation as well, right?
Yeah, and like, it doesn't need to be the exact. I mean, I'm one to say always, like, use what's in your kitchen. So if you can't get, this flour, try this, try. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that a big thing is just don't be intimidated. Dive in, have fun.
Bakers are intimidating, but
we're trying to.
You're changing that. You're
trying to change that.
That's great, and I love to hear that sense of community amongst millers, right?
Yeah, definitely.
I feel like we feel that way in the independent bookseller biz, where we feel like we're sort of in this together. And I'm going to be the first person to tell you, like, yes, we want you to buy the book from us so that we can do this, but I'm also going to be the first person to tell you, buy your book from your local indie, or buy this book from us because you're at this event. But whenever you have to buy another book, buy it from the indie where you are, right?
Yeah, and I wanted to say,
feed your own community that way.
For sure.
Yeah.
And I mean, I have been living in this region for, a goodly amount of time, and I have gone to Malaprop since there was way back, like 30 years ago. How long have you guys been there? Is it
38 years?
Yeah, so I've definitely been there since 30 years
39.
ago, early 90s, so it's such an honor to get to do the launch with you all, because it's true. It's like the independent bookstores and the independent restaurants and these regional mills.
Exactly.
It's like, this is the society that we're trying to build,
Yeah. Well, and we appreciate that, and the sense of community that keeps us all afloat, and again, within industries, having that sense, I think, as opposed to just overriding sense of competition, also helps to build something different and better for everybody. So I appreciate that. The fact that you have to stop yourself from listing all the other places that people can, all the other millers, like that's actually kind of great. So to Ellen, definitely pick up the book if you haven't already, so that you can get the full list and support a bunch of different people. Then we have another question from Kathy Cleary. Also known locally as a baker, was the founder of West End Bakery in West Asheville. So I'll just do a shout out. Hey, Kathy.
Hey, Kathy.
Dear friend.
Are there realms where you are not yet collaborating? This is also a perfect segue as it happens. Are there realms where you are not yet collaborating that you would like to be? It's a great question.
Yeah. I will say, I'm really excited. Well, a couple things, two different directions. One, Dave Bauer and I with Farm and Sparrow, we have been talking about trying to do some collaborative stuff to push, that's something that we'd love to do, so the bakers can get access to both our products. The other side of that is Andrea, where you and I had talked about and sort of started that, the work that you do with the schools, like that is so exciting to me. To try and have the product like what we're doing get into, the school system, which I know is such a challenging equation, but I think the potential, it's exciting if it's there,
Yeah, I mean, I think it's totally there. I think it's all about, and this year is going to be so exciting in terms of schoolwork, just very quickly, because it's like we have universal free lunch for through 2020 until 2022. So there's a lot there. But you're, in terms of your other collaborations, like you've done things with like so many brewers and like a million different things. I mean, I think, I don't know
French
that
Broad Chocolate. French Broad
yeah,
Chocolate
French
has
chocolate, like
their
that's,
malted chocolate bar that,
yeah,
the Riverbend Malt House does the malt,
yeah,
we mill it, and it goes into the chocolate bar. Love the folks at French Broad Chocolate and love that, the three of
yes,
us can kind of do that together.
yeah.
But yeah, good question, Kathy. We need to keep
I know,
thinking
Kathy,
on
that's
that.
such a good question. Maybe you should become the volunteer ambassador of new collaborations for
She is like queen
all of
volunteer
us.
ever.
Kathy
And
does.
Kathy is
I
Yeah,
also
we
know
can
that
see
Kathy
you.
does a lot of volunteering, and
Yes.
we'll let's go ahead and plug Bountiful City as well. We're here as
Oh,
well,
yes.
Yeah.
which is
Amazing.
Kathy's. And I know a bunch of people work on it. So Kathy's another person working for and towards more sustainable and equitable food systems
In a huge way. She's also
yeah.
one of the a major player in the Asheville Bread Festival. She is co-organizer with myself, Kathy, and Bex Oris. But yeah, Bountiful Cities is such an exciting thing, and yes.
And I want to, it is a couple minutes after 7, so we'll wrap up. And I just want to draw everyone's attention to the chat where Patricia's been posting about more about your work, Andrea. So we encourage people to check that out because it is a bigger and I think a really important conversation as well when we're looking at sustainability and equity in food and feeding local communities and people in a better way. I appreciate that y'all are looking at and doing that kind of work. So in addition to just like, there's this amazing flower that you may not know is grown near here that if you can buy it and make something amazing. But on top of that, there are also these sort of larger kind of issues.
Well, I would just like quickly say that like Jennifer's commitment to every project that gets more flavor and more nutrition and more sense of joy and connection into communities is 100%. And that's why I really want everyone to buy her book and support her because, from day one, we're doing this like sweet potato, North Carolina waffle project. And Jennifer just like sent flour, different extraction after different extraction to us, like how we could possibly do this. And meanwhile, we didn't even understand how we were going to produce them, but just all Jennifer cares about is like her eyes are on the prize in terms of like how we can create a really just system. I don't want to finish, Jen. I want you to like talk, but like, I mean, I just think Jennifer's a doer, and whether you want to be just like a doer in your own kitchen and just like make some amazing waffles, or you want to be like more of a social activist, like this book is a great blueprint for you. And it's just so much incredible information, so generous. The recipes are so smart, so perfectly written. So anyway.
Well, one thing I will say just to end is, because I didn't really mention a lot, is the bakeries that are in here and their profiles of bakers, and the bakers are a huge part of this whole story. This mill wouldn't exist without the bakers, those bakers that are out there, feeding their communities. And so, there's profiles, and they, the recipes come from the bakers, they come from myself as well. The whole goal is to make this accessible. So hopefully anybody can dive in and just have fun.
Wonderful. Well, with that, thank you both again so much. And thanks again to everyone who's been with us this evening. We appreciate that you've chosen to take some time with us. And it was great to hear about the new book, Southern Ground. And I hope folks are inspired to get the book and to make some of the recipes and to explore a little bit. So thank you both so much. And Jennifer, congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. And
The
Andrea,
publication.
thank you so much.
Andrea, thank you. Good night, everybody. Please stay safe and well, and we hope to see you again soon.